with my parents, they don't ask for a lot of help. That's just not natural for them. The younger generation, my kids, who are in their 20s, almost to 30, it's very natural for them to ask for help. And it's very natural for them to say, hey, we're a team. How do we do this together? And for those of us that are in the middle, we're saying, wait a second, I grew up with this. And they were very resilient. And so they seem to get through everything. But how do I balance that? So it's a constant juggle and recognizing it's okay to ask for help.
Celeste Cuffie here of Life Empowered Consulting Services, where our mission is to reach, empower, and motivate others to access and utilize their God-given, their natural, their inherent talents and skills, building better families, companies, and communities worldwide. Thank you so much for joining me on today. I am struggling because I have been sitting here with my special guest today, and we've already had like a full extenuated conversation about just life and its happenings. And so I'm excited to share with you and give you a purview into the dialogue and the conversations that I've been having with my very special guest, Sara Junio. Hi, Sara.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
I'm so glad you're here today.
Yeah.
So we want to just jump in. One of the things that I learned about you right away is that you were raised on a farm. And so this is going to be our fun fact. Tell me about that life.
That life, I remember learning a lot about organizational change management recently, and that everything I learned on the farm is directly tied to how we manage change, how we have resiliency. And if any farmers are out there, I'm sure you can attest, we had every opportunity. You have to pinch every penny at least 3 times before you can get any value out of it, meaning that you learned how to be creative in fixing things. You learned how to be creative in trying to solve, why is this animal behaving this way? Because they don't tell you what's wrong, but you know that something's wrong. And so you just learn to observe. You learn to be creative. You learn to take every setback as an opportunity and say, okay, well, we didn't get as much out of the crops or the animals this season, but there's always next season. And so what do we do to improve upon for next season? So it was a great baseline that I had no idea at the time what it was all about. And so the farm itself was mostly beef cattle.
Okay.
And a lot of sheep and a lot of pigs. And so we had feeder pigs that we would raise every 6 months. You send them off to Jones Sausage or wherever, the market. We also had a couple horses. We had 2 milking cows, one for us, the family of 6 kids, and one for the rest of the animals. And we had a little generator, and we'd milk those cows. And, it was a nice, quaint little farm between the feeder pigs, the sheep, which are very dumb animals.
Don't say that.
And they are. And then the cattle. We had a lot of beef cattle. And with the beef cattle, I did a lot of showmanship. And in whether it's through 4-H or FFA, I also went to school. My first round of education was at UW-Madison with the Farm and Industry short course. So I was preparing to take over a second farm and learning crop management, animal management, or herdsmanship, we called it. And there again, even working with animals, when you're showing an animal, and those that have younger kids can appreciate this, the anxiety that you have, the animals pick up on that. And so if you're really nervous in the ring, that animal's going to be really nervous, and it's a disaster. So we had to learn how to manage our emotions, manage our anxiety, get to know the judges. And the judges were great, with little kids, but that anxiety passes through, whether it's a leash or a prod or whatever tool you have. And so everything that I learned on the farm, I tie to today, observing people, resiliency, being creative, looking at, okay, there might be another perspective that I haven't thought of. How do we look at that? So that's a little bit about the farm itself. And then if you are interested in the book, I talk about how losing the farm really shaped the trajectory of the direction I went within my career.
So, and that was actually going to be my next question of how did you shift from you went to school for farming, you were going to take over a farm to now here you are in corporate work, change management, process, operations, all of the things.
Yeah. I like to call myself a recovering corporate banker. Dealing with those large companies and all those financial statements and legal counsel to read through 200 pages of a legal agreement. You don't learn a lot in that process, but a lot of that came from when I was in high school. It was in the 80s, not to date myself, but that was the economic times that were pretty rough, and a lot of farms were going under business. And ours was no different, except for the fact that the bank came and took the farm. And, as someone in your high school formative years, that was not an exciting time to watch.
I could see
out
that.
in the country, all of these trailers coming up your backcountry road where there's normally no traffic. And they take your animals, they take your equipment, they took everything.
Wow.
And you felt helpless.
Yeah.
And ever since then, so I left school and said, okay, well, clearly I'm not going to be going into agriculture because I was so bitter, understandably so. When your world is shaken underneath you, you're thinking, oh, I'm going to be running another farm for parents, carrying on the legacy, and that was all taken away. So I decided, went back and got a Mrs. degree, met my husband at the time, and decided I'm going to get into banking. I want to understand what this whole financial business is all about. And it ended up leading to a 30-year career, starting in the branch network, learning about personal finance, learning about the investments and securities, learning about small business finance, mortgage financing, and then getting all the way into developing products for the corporate world and helping the corporate finance area. And so I really hit every single area in the institution and tried to understand. I didn't know it at the time, but now that you look back, tried to understand what was going on in the financial institution industry that would cause somebody to take the family farm and so forth. So I learned a lot, got through. It was a very good career for me, but I also recognized after the financial crisis, it wasn't where I wanted to be long term. So that's how I got into how do I take everything I've learned and move over and help transform other organizations.
Absolutely. That is so powerful. And as I'm sitting here, I'm like, I knew we liked each other because we have so much in common. And so while you were farming, I actually was in the medical field. I wanted to be a nurse when I grew up, quote unquote. And I started out in a nursing home. So I was a certified nursing assistant. And in that role, they actually put me on the hospice unit. So at that point, can you imagine an 18-year-old, 19-year-old kid,
Dealing
right?
with that, yeah.
And this is day in and day out. This is not, in the life where they've been around for a year or 6 months. This is, some folks were coming in literally by the end of the day, they had transitioned out. So I ended up moving out of that industry altogether and going into banking. And it was actually banking where I really picked up my acumen for technology.
Yeah.
And I know one of the things that we were just talking about is that you were at the Milky Way event not too long ago. The Tech Equity Hub. And so talk about, especially with all of the work that you've done so far, how has technology undergird what you've been doing?
Yeah, no, it's an integral part. I mean, banking actually is one of the very innovative industries that is out there. And so as you get into marketing and product management, everything was technology. And taking that dinosaur of an industry and moving from very old archaic systems to, people can't even imagine having your transaction processed only at 2 a.m. in the morning. And now you get it instantaneously.
Absolutely.
So there's been a huge shift.
Yeah.
And when I got into the banking area, probably about halfway through my career, I moved from marketing into product management, product development. And so that was all about coming into an organization, and I was in product management for the commercial division, coming into an organization and understanding, okay, how are you managing your reporting for the CFO?
Yeah, what is your
How are you
process?
managing
Yes.
your, Finance 101 is you collect your money faster than you pay it out. And so how are you ensuring that you're collecting your money, earning it, earning on it, earning some sort of interest, having a financial gain before you pay it out. And on the corporate world, when you're dealing with millions and billions of dollars, that's a significant operation to understand. And
Absolutely.
so getting in is where, and helping them is where we had invested and said, you know what, we can be creative with any technology that's out there. So let's just give it a try. And if you find one customer that's willing to say, yeah, I'll pay for it, it seems to work for me, then you can commercialize it from there. And ever since then, that role as a product manager, product developer, just enlightened me in terms of the art of the possible. We like to put our blinders on and say, well, I can only do steps 1, 2, and 3. But until you start to meet with other people and collaborate and say, okay, this is the problem I'm trying to solve. I'm thinking of it this way, but there are 5 other people that have 5 different answers. And so that's where the whole collaboration comes into play, and innovation and creativity and the art of the possible then comes to life.
I love that. I think that there's actually a book called The Art of the Possible. I feel like I've come across. But when you were talking about that, I was just thinking about, you've published a couple of books, right? And if you were thinking about your life as a book, what would it be called?
That is a great question. I would say it's The Light on the Hill. So I've got a couple of chapters. Well, yes, you're right. I do have one book that's been published. Another book that will be, so that book is called The Identity Fact. That's a personal story. That's been out on Amazon for a few years now. I've got another book that I'm partnering with a professor at Milken University about the evolution of management practices and talking about the evolution of organizational change and business transformation. So that'll be next year. And then I've got an ebook that's published with my coaching partners from the Wisconsin Way. And then I've got another personal book on the signs God is giving you that you're going through a personal transformation. And so I love writing, but the theme that I have in the writing is that I try and give hope. I try and be that beacon of light so that I can help you be empowered to be something better than what you are today. And so when you think about it from a biblical perspective, be the light, be the beacon, the city on the hill, that's where I like to be, is how can I be on that hill overseeing and helping people come along with me on that journey and shining the light for them.
I love that so much. And, full transparency, I was just out of town. I was in Dallas, Texas, and it was beautiful to see the people, the culture, all of the things. However, what I also saw was a very large population of unhoused individuals. And that hurt my feelings. Like, what do you do? And so when you talk about hope, how do you help inspire hope when you see, right, all of the things that would give people pause to being hopeful?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, my hope is filled from a spiritual aspect, but I recognize not everybody has that hope. And so you try and share the story, but you also have to recognize, people have to, they learn and they change when they can see how that hope, how that vision resonates with them. And so if you can speak their language, if you can get in, and I'm not talking ethnically, I'm talking about people learn through experience. And so you have to understand their experience, understand their frame of reference so that you can speak the language that they're resonating with when they process that. And the more you can try and get into where they're at, how they're coming to the table, what their frame of reference is, and speak that language, then you can start to pull out of them, okay, have you tried this? And I find that fear is such a motivating and demotivating factors. Some people say fear is going to motivate me not to go down that path, and I'm going to charge through competitively to another direction, or fear holds us back.
Absolutely.
And so helping people understand fear is driving your belief system, limiting beliefs.
Yeah.
And I always ask the question, whether it's myself or others, who says you can't do that? You know, if you are asked or told, well, or you feel, no, I can't take that job, I don't meet all the qualifications. Well, who says? Did they tell you that already? You know, apply for it and let them tell you.
Yeah, do not disqualify yourself.
Don't disqualify yourself. Don't put yourself in a position where your limiting beliefs are controlling your behavior, as opposed to your behavior is controlling your beliefs. Big difference.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, it's so important that we continue to inspire hope in spite of what we see. But I also recognize, too, kind of what you believe is a thing, but then also what we see is a thing, right? And so, again, as I was saying, I was just looking at all of the people. And, you know, when you hear about some issues, you think it is based on a culture. But there were men, there were women, there were old, they were young, they were every ethnicity, and they were just all out there. And so in spite of that, though, right, we have to find the hope within us. And it helps to have people that will help draw that out of us as we're navigating some of the things that we're seeing. And, you know, you've talked a little bit about kind of that farming and even losing the farm and how that could have been debilitating to you. That could have kept you from hoping or even pursuing anything beyond, right? Because they're only going to take it anyway. What kept you hopeful?
Well, I have a little bit of competitiveness in me.
Okay.
Just a little. Come from a family of 6 kids.
Yeah.
I'm the oldest.
Oh.
And so how dare I let my siblings, who I'm sure are watching this, outshine me. So, you know, we joke about it. We do have a little bit of competitiveness, but, you know, sometimes you have to step in and say, I'm not going to let that situation take hold of me.
Right.
And, you know, I learned that not only in the farm, but just early in my career. I think Wisconsin is very well known for its virtues, one of which is resiliency and integrity. And we just have that stick-to-itiveness that we get to it and say, okay, well, that failed, or what's the lesson I learned here, and let's not do it again. And how can I observe from other people and take those lessons? So I think a lot of it is part of that Wisconsin upbringing, and that's what I sense. Now, everybody has a different perspective because they're all coming at it from different
different
stories,
lenses. Yeah.
different lenses.
Yeah. Okay, so we were talking about the books. So I have this other question that I was thinking about specifically for you, because you're sharing your story, you're sharing your experiences, you're sharing all of these things in your book. Tell us about something that you didn't want to share, but you knew that if you shared it, it would be helpful.
In the book?
In the book.
That book, so the book, The Identity Effect, is a collection of stories from 20 women that have undergone a transformation and found their identity in their relationship through Christ.
Okay.
And so there's some pretty deep stories in there of transformation. And I came, the publisher and I were talking about, okay, well, my story, it wasn't finished. I was still in the middle of it. And so I remember people that knew me well were saying, you got to tell your story, you got to tell your story. And I kept saying, my story's not finished. And I don't have the wrapper like everybody else does that said, oh, I, got into the pit, hit the pit for a while, got out of the pit, now everything's hunky-dory.
Right.
And I kept saying, I'm still in the pit. What am I going to be writing about? But the message that I would say is, and I'll get to your question in just a second, in general, you may feel like you're in the pit, but somebody else is probably in the same pit in just a different capacity, or maybe, 20 yards away, or may have gone through a similar situation, but you feel like you're the only one
You're the
has
only
ever
one.
gone this way.
Yes.
And you know what? There's billions of people in the world.
Yeah.
The chances of you being the only one having that story is very, very slim. Very slim.
Yeah, yeah.
So speak out, because your story is unique to you, but your perspective is what gets everybody thinking. They may say, oh, I've had a similar situation. Okay, what was your perspective on it? How did you learn? So I had a couple of different things in there in terms of I learned that I was placing, as a Christian woman, I had a lot more idols in my life that were defining who I was. And when all those things started to get stripped away is when I started to realize my focus was not in the right area. So for an example, for those that are in this area, Brookfield, they're very familiar with the Azana salon back in 2012. It was actually this week was the anniversary. Last week was the anniversary. Third week in October of 2012, where there was a mass shooting, and several people were injured, but there were 3 fatalities, and one of which was my hairdresser. And for those women that know, hairdressers, you tend to find one and stick with them.
Yes.
And I've met people talking about sharing stories where they'll come up to me and say, oh my gosh, I've had my hairdresser for 25 years. I would never change her. And a part of that, I think, is not only do they get to know your hair and the way you style it and how the medication affects all that and so forth, but they became your therapist. And they know everything about you. And so when my hairdresser was murdered, and it took me 10 years to just say that word, it was devastating. It shook me to the core. It's like, well, wait a second. Who am I going to... We had kids the same age. We went to the same church. We did. Not only was she a hairdresser, but we knew each other outside. And you're never prepared when a life like that, she was younger than me, is taken away so traumatically. And so it took me a while to get through that, but it helped me recognize, again, going to your comment before, you could be in the pit and you could never come out of that. Or you could say, you know what, I'm going to tell my story. I'm going to say, this is how it impacted me. And I've learned that I can't, God is who I should be putting my trust in. He's my counselor. He's the one I should be referring to, and not always getting so deep and emotionally connected to other people that don't necessarily have the same values.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that was the big lesson learned. That really, as I went through my entire life, from the loss of the farm to the loss of the hairdresser to the loss of several other things, the common denominator was, okay, God's taking some things away because he wants to see me on the other side. And I tell you, once I recognized that and started to really put my priorities where they needed to be, I couldn't have been more blessed.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it was a painful process, but it's worthwhile in the end.
Again, I resonate wholeheartedly. My husband and I have been married for 1 million years now, but there was a time when we were, quote unquote, considered the power couple, right? So he's working in a Fortune 100. I'm working in a Fortune 100. We have amazing kids. We've done all of the things, right?
Yeah.
Living the American dream. And then I lost my job.
Yeah.
And so I had at that point realized that I had put all of my faith and all of my eggs in all of the baskets.
Yep.
Instead of in him. And so I had to go through that same.
That was one of the things I lost too. You lose your job, you lose your marriage, you lose your house, you lose your friend, you lose everything.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, what's going on?
It's definitely a redefining moment. And so I love how you're saying you would talk about it, because as I was thinking about this question for you, I asked myself the same question, what would I say? And my answer to me was, I've been silent for too long. And so allowing so many things to happen without a voice, without my perspective, without the perspective that God has given us. And so it's just wonderful to hear you talk about that. Now, one of the things that you said, though, in your resume, which was amazing, by the way, was that you are a forward thinker. So what things are you thinking about now? What's on your mind?
Well, it's interesting. The teams that I work with, I tell them in advance, I'm a forward thinker, meaning I'm always looking to the next opportunity, the next project, the next phase. And sometimes I forget to turn around and say, are you still with me?
Come on, guys.
Right. Are you still with me? Or were there any details that I missed? And so we joke about that. But, I coach people on so many different assessment tools that are out there, strengths, Clifton Strengths or DISC or whatnot. And the part that resonates with me is, I'm naturally forward thinking, visionary, strategic. And so I'm just looking at, okay, how can we do this differently? Or how can we do this more efficiently? So we're not wasting time. I always joke with my team, I don't have the word wait in my vocabulary, which I know they struggle with, but I'm like, let's just keep driving forward because until somebody stops us or points us in the right direction, who are we to question? We have our vision, we know where we're going. Let's just keep going and see what comes out of this. But as far as me personally, we talked about this before going on air. I am similar to you, going for a doctorate in strategic leadership. About to embark on the infamous stage of the dissertation. But I am bound and determined to finish this in 2025. So what does that get me? It gets me, some credibility, but more of that, the coup de grace, just that feeling of accomplishment. Because I'm always a believer that education is the key to everything. You got to keep learning because especially now with AI and we're in this industrial revolution, some say it's 5.0, 4.0, whether it's the fourth or fifth industrial revolution, change is happening faster and faster and faster. And the minute I sit down and I can't understand something on a computer or I can't understand what people are saying, and this little voice in my head says, oh, you're so old, Sarah. Now's the time. Like, no, I'm not giving in. I'm going to learn how to do this. It may take me a little bit longer, but it gives me that opportunity to say, okay, how do I ensure that I'm leading the life and demonstrating to others through examples that you got to keep learning.
Yeah, that's so good. Okay, so the little voice in your head, tell me how you keep that voice at bay, especially when it's telling you things like that, like, quit or sit down or you're too old or this isn't for you, this is for somebody else. How do you manage you?
Yeah, that's a great question. Usually, there is some credence to it. I don't ignore it, but I have to step back and say, they always say there's a grain of truth to something, to everything. So what is it that it's trying to tell me? And when I find myself stagnant or getting frustrated, I step back and say, what is it that I'm doing that is not natural to me? In other words, if I'm being asked to create minutia of detail, that is not comfortable. It's not natural to me. Can I do it? Yes. It's going to take a lot longer because I am more of that big picture thinker and that thought leader. So there's somebody on my team that he's an individual that is much more into the details. And so I say, you know what, we balance each other out because he's more of an in the moment person and I'm more of a, let's think about how this is going to be in a year from now. And so we pull each other together and really complement. But you got to recognize, okay, what is it that's causing the frustration?
Right,
Sometimes it's, okay, I didn't get any productivity out today and I feel like I didn't add value.
Right.
Or I'm trying to please somebody today and I probably shouldn't be a people pleaser. So what is it that I can adjust that thinking? I always step back and say, I hear that voice, but what is the frame of reference around that voice that I need to address? And then tweak my mindset, my thoughts, because your thoughts drive your actions. And
Absolutely.
so you got to tweak the thoughts.
And as you're talking about that, what I'm thinking about or what I hear you saying and I'll say it a little differently, is that emotional intelligence.
Yep.
Being self-aware,
Yeah.
the ability to manage that, and then also working with your team, being socially aware, and then the ability
Correct.
to manage that as well. How have you been able to successfully implement that into your business? Like, at the end of your day, are you feeling like we're getting closer, or are you bumping your head like, why are they like this? Like,
Oh, I love this. So that's the beauty of organizational change. You have to have a lot of emotional intelligence.
Right.
I like to consider myself a behavioral scientist because I love studying people. I love trying to figure out why in the world did they just do that?
Right. What were you thinking?
Yeah. And so, and because I can step back and see patterns very quickly and say, oh, I see how we're connecting the dots. They may not see it, but I can understand the behavior that they are doing and how maybe some sort of incentive or some sort of message was given to them that they're operating that way. And maybe it's a limiting belief that's putting them in a swim lane that they shouldn't be in. And so how do we work through that? But just stepping back and studying and figuring out what was it about that conversation or about that report or that presentation. What was your intention behind it? And the hard part is we're always judged for our actions, not our intentions. And so I try and step back and say, okay, I see the action, but what was the intention? And if there's a challenge or a struggle, then I'll pull that person aside and ask them, what was your intentions? How do you think this went over? And so if you get them to talk about their intentions, then that action makes a lot more sense. So it's really getting into the crux of what was the person behaving and what was their thoughts around that behavior.
So think about, and please tell the audience, what kind of work do you do, but how much of that work is the coaching and the development?
Well, so what I do is business transformations, typically involving technology or data governance, data management. And a lot of that is companies are coming in with this whole industrial revolution and recognizing in order for us to do more with data, we have to have systems to collect that data and we have to have more automation. And so I get involved in those business transformations, either leading the technology initiative as a program manager or specializing in, if it's a large company, how do I help them let the technology people implement the system, but then how do I work with the business to accept that and adopt that that technology? Or in one client, they're developing the system, but now we have to get them to move out of building mode and into, okay, you got to integrate this system with the entire corporation and get your head out of the weeds and let's figure out how are we going to now become relationship managers. And so change within companies, so within divisions. And every single day, it's coaching.
It's coaching. Yeah.
It's coaching. So I have to coach people on, okay, going back to what you had asked before, how could we have done this maybe differently? Is there a different way? Or why do you think the business or this area needs to know this information? And intuitively, they all know. And that's what good coaching is. Intuitively, you all know what to do. It's just, how do you get somebody to bring it out of you? How do you get somebody to empower you to take that next step? So every job, I have a lot of coaching. But then on the side, I also, with my own company, do executive coaching and team building sessions.
Yeah, and I was thinking about that because I know in the transformation, there's an end product.
Yeah.
But in order to have the end product, even if you're using technology, you have to help develop, coach, and lead the people.
Right.
And sometimes coaching, I think that term may feel like it's even overutilized, and so organizations lean away, kind of steer away from it. But it's so valuable if you're really trying to get anything done, you know?
Especially. And you have to know your audience. I mean, one transformation program that I led, that audience, the average tenure at that particular part of the company was 20 years at the, that's a long time to be at a company. And here I'm introducing more automation. I'm taking away manual processing
Yep.
and introducing automation.
And so what do they hear?
Right. And so they hear my job's being eliminated.
Yep.
And so you have to tell a story, paint the picture that resonates with them. And so the picture that I painted with them is, okay, let's sit down. It's close to the holidays. You all remember, because I knew roughly their ages. I mean, when you're there 20 years. So remember the days when you had that JCPenney shopping catalog or the Montgomery Ward shopping catalog, and your holiday experience was you couldn't wait as a child to get that catalog. And then, yeah, you had images, you had pictures of the bike or the dollhouse or the doll or whatever, the remote control car. And then you'd go and you'd flip through every page and you'd circle in your blue pen what you wanted. And then you realized mom and dad wasn't going to buy all of that. And Santa probably couldn't make all of that. So then you went through all those pages and circled in your red pen what you really wanted. And you wrote down the list and you gave it to your parents or whomever. And I said, that was your shopping experience. And then you probably got one thing out of your list of 200 that you wanted. I said, now you have Amazon that's giving you the same experience, but instead it's telling you based off of your buying behaviors, hey, have you thought about this? And, you know, other people in your area are thinking about this. And so you still get the same product. You still have the critical thinking, but it's just more efficient. And yeah, it's promoting more consumerism. But they understood that because that was what they could relate to.
Right.
It wasn't taking away their job.
Right.
It was just giving them a new tool set to be able to provide, to have more critical thinking in their job. And so that made it took away the fear factor and made it a little bit more palpable.
And that's what's important, just making sure that we're able to let people know that they can stay hopeful.
Right.
That because we do this new thing, it doesn't mean that you're going away.
Right.
And, you know, the other side of this is that sometimes you are going away, and that's okay too. And so I think you've been laid off from work. Me too. So talk about those experiences and how they've positioned you for where you are today.
Oh my gosh. So the first time was very painful, and that's when I thought my identity was tied in this corporate life. And now who am I as a person? It was very, very hard, but you try and tap into as many resources as you can, but realize, you know, they can only help you so far. At the end of the day, you have to pick up your bootstraps and say, I'm going to take this step forward. The second time was a little bit easier, but it was still painful. Because you have to work through not only the emotions, but then how do you tell your family, your friends, how do you manage your finances? And, companies don't do a lot of severance packages nowadays or things like that. So that's where you learn how to be resourceful, creative, and tap into people to say, I'm not the only one that has gone through this. How are you paying for your mortgage? How are you paying for insurance? And there's a lot more resources out there that I did not know we had access to as a society until you're in that mode and you ask those questions.
Absolutely.
There's got to be a way. There just has to be a way. Nobody is in this situation forever. So how are they getting out of it? And so that goes back to that whole resiliency and resourcefulness and just saying there's got to be a better way.
Yeah. And I think one of the things, too, that I've heard you kind of mention as a theme that I want to lift is your willingness to tap into your resources, your willingness to ask questions, your willingness to be curious, willingness to ask for help when there's something that you're unfamiliar with. Sometimes that's tough for people to do. So is it because you grew up with a house full of siblings and you were the oldest that you had to do a lot of delegation and ask for help? How did you get?
Here's how I. It's a funny story. Here's how I delegated to my siblings growing up. Each day of the week, this is a funny story. I think it's funny. Each day of the week, we were responsible for dishes, washing the dishes and cleaning up the kitchen. So my day was probably like Monday, and then we went down the row, and everybody else had Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. But I remember my day was at the beginning of the week because it was, and it may have been Sunday even, where we had the biggest meal. And I was always the fastest to get the dishes done. Well, the reason I was the fastest is because I never did the dishes. I put them in the oven. I put them back in the cupboards. I hid them in the pantry.
I hope that's not the efficiency we've been talking about all hour.
And so when Mom or whoever went to make dinner for the rest of the week, they're like, oh, wow, that's another dirty dish. We're just going to put that in the sink and Brenda or Stephanie can
That
wash
is
it.
hilarious.
So the dishes piled up by the time we got to Friday, the youngest, who's out in California right now, I'm sure.
Oh, I can't wait till they see this.
That was my delegation.
Oh, that was your workaround. Okay.
Yeah. I'm
Okay.
not telling you that they're there. You got to find them. And guess what? Mom found them.
That is hilarious.
You had asked, do I ask, for help?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't. I could do a lot better.
Mm-hmm.
I think I'm trying to tell myself that asking for help, and I think it's okay now. I'm that sandwich generation where, with my parents, they don't ask for a lot of help. That's just not natural for them. The younger generation, my kids, who are in their 20s, almost to 30, it's very natural for them to ask for help. And it's very natural for them to say, hey, we're a team. How do we do this together? And for those of us that are in the middle, we're saying, wait a second, I grew up with this. And they were very resilient. And so they seem to get through everything. But how do I balance that? So it's a constant juggle and recognizing it's okay to ask for help, but it's still very hard.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think about that too. And I've not thought about it in the terms of being part of that sandwich generation, because definitely the same thing. My mother, my grandmother, they do not ask for anything. And I'm like, what do you need? Right? Whereas conversely, my kids, hey, Mom, sure. It's just, normal. And so finding yourself in a place where asking for help would have been perceived as weakness or a sign of negativity or incompetence or whatever. Whereas today, asking for help from the younger generation's perspective is a sign of collaboration and teamwork and you trying to manage both win, right? And so it's very, very interesting. But now we've talked about a lot of things. But one of the things we have not talked about is like your family, your kids, your dogs. When I think about living life empowered, I often think about the whole person, and we're not all just our job. We're not all just, I'll say, ministry or church. We operate in all of these places, but there is another part of us. I want to hear a little bit about that part of you.
Well, I have 3 boys, and I love this age because they're all, one's just finishing college, the other 2 are out, and they're on their own. And it's hard as a parent because you want to be able to step in as a parent and say, I wouldn't do that. If I were you, I wouldn't be in that situation. But you can't. You gotta remember, when you were 25 years old, you didn't want your parents telling you what to do. So it's been interesting to step back and to be a coach, not a parent in the directive sense. So my oldest is 29, and he is the most creative person with a lot of ingenuity in terms of, let's just try and figure this out. He did, for the last 10 years, he was a coach with the U.S. Snowboarding Association and did a lot of coaching with younger kids, created his own business, took, kids from 7 to 17 out west, mostly to Colorado and California and Portland, and taught them all how to really be advanced snowboarders. As a matter of fact, one of them went to the Olympics. One of his students went to the Olympics a few years ago. She's slated to go to the Olympics in Italy in 2026. So it's nice to see how he's progressed. But I watch him with those kids, and he does not take no for an answer. But he doesn't in a nice way. He's like, why? So what? Who's telling you can't do this? Why have you not tried it? And so they look at him like, I suppose nobody. So I better do it because Adam, my son, is going to, tell me otherwise. And so he's very creative, and now he works for a company that does a lot of installation of conveyor belts and so forth around the country, 20 miles of conveyor belts. But he's got a wonderful girlfriend. My middle son is engaged. I I don't want to say was a Marine, because once you're a Marine, you're always a Marine. So he is my Marine and manages. He's a gun instructor because he fell in love with the infantry in the Marines. So he's a gun instructor and manages 2 gun ranges while he's trying to plan a wedding and do a lot of landscaping. And he is a great teacher coach, just like his older brother. And so he's got a wonderful fiance who I just love. And then my youngest son is smart as a whip. My other 2 boys say he's smarter than all of us combined. And he's got a good head on his shoulders. But I think he is the byproduct of the changes that have gone in my life, that he looks for perfection. And so we're trying to work through, okay, not everything has to be perfect. You have to go, and even in the business side, when I work with technology, it's like if we're looking to be 110% confident on what we're going to be delivering, we're never going to deliver something.
Yeah, we'll never get
You
it
have to
done.
feel comfortable with 70 to 75% confidence.
Yeah, good enough.
And
Yes.
and be done. Because at that point, after that, you're just managing the exceptions. And what are the chances of that? So he's at that age, 23, where he's stepping out and learning, okay, we've got some bumps and bruises along the way. And so 3 boys. I don't know if I could have handled a girl. I think God gave me 3 boys for a reason.
He knew what he was doing.
He did. Yep. So I love my 3 boys, and I love the girlfriends. I do have, coming from the farm, I've always been a fan of animals. I wish I had a horse, but I don't. I have 2 big dogs, one of which is a standard poodle, 65 pounds.
Oh, yeah.
And
So
then
really
the other one is a mix between a shepherd, a German shepherd, and a husky. And he technically is owned by my significant other. And he is 70 pounds. So we have 2 big
dogs.
lap dogs.
Lap dogs. Okay.
And they, even though the kids aren't home because they're all on their own, the dogs remind you who's important. And so even today, if you leave your shoes out and they want your attention, they won't come up. If they come up to you while you're on a conference call, I've had many conference calls with the poodle in my face, but they'll come up to you. If you're not giving the attention, then they start taking your stuff. So just today we were wandering in the yard. Okay, why is that shoe in the middle of my yard? Because they're looking for your attention. So it keeps you grounded. Like, okay, it's time for a walk. Okay, it's time for food. Okay, it's time for a little playtime. So that otherwise you become so intense or focused. And so
I love that so much. And so, the overall tenets of this podcast, and honestly, what Life Empowered does is to embrace, is to empower, and to elevate. Talk about how those 3 words kind of work for you.
Well, I love empowering people. Matter of fact, my personal mission statement is empowering people. And how do I be that light, that beacon that gives the light to others so that they can see that there's the art of the possible. So I live that life every single day. Even in church, I play keys. In the band, we have a non-denominational church, out in Waukesha, River Glen. And so just getting out there and playing the keys and getting involved, it's such a spiritually uplifting opportunity. And then, that's a church that is a younger generation. So again, how do you connect with them and build those relationships? And whether it's coaching or in the business world, I've learned it's all about relationships.
Absolutely.
It's all about, and so how do you elevate, not in an egotistical way, but just giving them that boost of confidence that they need, that maybe you're seeing that they don't even realize they need, or showing them, can we look at things a little bit differently? Let's just play this out, see what happens, and just have that brainstorming session, and to watch their eyes and their faces light up. Oh, I haven't thought about that, and why are we not doing this sooner? Well, that's a great question.
When would you like to start?
Yeah, right. So I try and incorporate that in everything I do. I love being a woman of influence. And however I can be an influential woman, whether it's through the nonprofit organizations I'm involved with, or the coaching, or the transformation businesses, that's important to me. And so if I can be that woman of influence, it kind of touches all of those areas.
Yeah, absolutely. And so my last question for you, and Sara, again, you've just been fantastic. We've got to do lunch soon, but it's just been great chatting with you. But my last question for today is, what's something, because we've talked about a lot in this hour, but what's something that you feel like the audience can do right away to live life empowered? Just from our conversation, like, what are you thinking? Like, if I could get them to do one thing, maybe two, whatever that is, what would you say?
I would say, evaluate your actions in anything that you're doing. And if you don't like the result that you're getting, understand, you can change an action, but you got to get to the root cause. And your actions are derived from your thoughts. Your thoughts are derived from your belief system. So what is the limiting belief that's creating your thoughts, that's driving your actions? And ask that question, who says I can't do that? That just at the end of the day, if you get frustrated or you're not far enough along in something, or you're telling yourself no shouldn't be in the vocabulary. It should be like not now or something like that. Ask your question. Well, who says I can't do this?
Absolutely.
Who says? Who says? God didn't say it.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I love, thank you for so much for sharing that. Thank you so much for sharing that. And then also, thank you again for your time. Thank you for this space with you. It has just been amazing. And those of you that are watching, please make sure you take notes. You watch this one a couple of times. I encourage you to do so that you'll have some of these boulders. I don't even like to say nuggets, boulders of information and insight that you can apply to make yourself, to get yourself to where you want to be, so that you are also knowing that you are embraced, you are empowered. And through this conversation, we know that you are elevated. So thank you again, and have an amazing day. And remember, live life empowered. Take care. Goodbye.